Hey guys, sorry I have to do this in the middle of my workday today to get through some of this stuff, and I had to wait till I could take a break. So, also I have the dog here, so I had to take care of that. He's probably just gonna sit behind me while we do this. You want to go down? All right. So we're gonna do like 45 minutes to an hour of this now. This will be like part 2. We did part 1 last night, and we'll finish whatever we don't get to this afternoon. I'll come back and finish it tonight. I don't know what time yet, though. So, here's how this works. The full deposition transcripts was leaked yesterday by Blake Lively without confidential information like personal addresses sealed. So that was a problem, right? But it looks like, from what we can tell, the only information that Wayfair requested to be sealed in this document was that personal address on each one. So like you can see from the highlighted parts what they wanted to keep sealed. And that's the only thing that I saw that was highlighted. So that's kind of why I went ahead and read it. It was like there was nothing else that they were trying to keep out of the public eye that they didn't want anyone to see. It's just that it wasn't supposed to be put out there yet. The personal address obviously wasn't supposed to come out there at all. That's a huge problem. But the rest of it, it was eventually going to be seen by the public anyways. And then by the time I was deciding whether or not I wanted to stream on it last night, I had seen it. It was going around social media and everything, and everybody had already seen it. It was a little too late. Of course, I am not going to show any of the personally identifying stuff because that's terrible. But I'm going to go through the transcript with you guys. So the Wayfair parties yesterday did write a letter to the judge about this. That letter is sealed. So they filed a letter with the judge regarding this issue. And they said, we want this letter sealed to like further protect privacy. So we don't know the contents of that letter, but it is regarding this issue. And also, Blake Lively's attorneys responded last night with a very, very short letter, which we'll take a look at here really quick before we get into the transcript. Hang on. There's really not much to it. But you could tell from this letter, which was filed late last night, the parties are still talking about this issue. And so she says that she's not going to refile these with redactions on them because they don't need to, which begs the question, why did you put them on there in the first place? And why were they the only ones that weren't sealed in all of your exhibits? So, yeah, that's pretty weird. But the judge's ruling this morning, I think some people saw the judge's ruling this morning and assumed that he was ruling in favor of Blake sealing the exhibits. But no, he was ruling in favor of the Wayfair party, saying, yes, we can keep your letter sealed since there's still ongoing consultations until, the court does anything further on this. So let me see real quick. 1 second. I don't know if you guys can see that. I'll try to zoom in a little bit. So the judge is saying the Wayfair party's letter at 12:18 that they filed last night shall remain sealed pending further order of the court to protect the privacy interests of the party. So pending further order of the court means we don't know if the court's going to do anything about this or not, presumably because, as this letter here says, there's ongoing consultations between the parties' lawyers. I don't really know what that would entail because I'm not an attorney, but it seems like the judge isn't like saying he's not going to do anything. I don't know if they actually asked for sanctions or anything of that nature. They could be arguing about something like that. But it's sealed, so we don't know. And the judge is saying we can keep that sealed, right? So anyways, I just wanted to kind of go over that real quick since that did happen this morning. If you missed last night's stream where we went through part of this deposition transcripts, I'll put together like a playlist of these videos so that you can see them all. But the thing is, with the Wayfair party's depositions, it's basically split up into like the 2 days, right? So Stephanie Jones' attorneys had their time with them on the first day. And I skipped over that part in favor of starting with the Lively party's questioning, which was on the second day. So what we're looking at right now is Blake Lively's attorney, Michael Gottlieb, questioning Justin. There's a whole other day's worth of pages where Stephanie Jones' attorney is questioning Justin. But I want to get through all the Lively stuff first. So this is part 2 of day 2, basically. And it's kind of complicated to explain. Hopefully that makes sense. Somebody needs to make a freaking flow chart or something. Like I said, I'll make a playlist of these videos. I'll put a link to them in the comments later on after I finish this live stream, which means eventually because of my ADHD. So it'll take me a minute. But yeah. Oh, hey, what's up? My friend from Docket Updates here in the chat says she could read with me if I need her to. I totally would if I didn't have to go back to work after this, because I'll tell you what's going to happen, and everybody who's watching this knows. If I bring you on right now, I will talk at you for 20 minutes, and that will take up like a third of our time. So if you're free tonight, though, send me an email because I'll be back doing the rest of this tonight, what we don't get through this afternoon. I'm going to try to get through as much as possible as we can right now. So let me go ahead and pull this up. Look at Butter. He's already bored to death back there. Okay. Well, yeah, if you guys don't know yet, docketupdates.com has all the court filings and information that comes up on there, and also is obviously on YouTube now. So, yeah. Mods, if you want to pop a link to that channel, feel free in the chat there. Okay. All right. So, again, this is Michael Gottlieb, one of Blake Lively's lead attorneys, questioning Justin Baldoni. They're talking about stuff that happened behind the scenes, like when before filming was supposed to start, but the complaining was happening afterwards. So these are complaints that happened about stuff that happened before production, if that makes sense. Hopefully it will make sense as we go through this. So he says, back to It Ends With Us. In the course of production, did you ever invite the department heads to go to a bathhouse or spa with you? Justin says, I may have. Do you have recollection of it as you sit here today? Like in a formal way to all the department heads? Any invitation in any form? And Justin says, yes, I believe I did. And then Gottlieb is reading a text here, and it's something that Alex Sachs wrote to Angie Giannetti. Says, Justin was very dismissive of, oh, wait, no, hang on. Yeah, I skipped a page there. Yeah, no, we're good. And so we're reading through like the text of people that had complained about him. And it says, Justin was very dismissive of her when she wanted to direct, and then used Jamie to try to manipulate her when he realized she couldn't. She should co-direct it after she got Daddy-O going. So they're talking about Christy Hall here. Justin says, well, the director of Daddy-O was our writer, which was Christy Hall. Okay, and so you understand her to be discussing you being very dismissive of Christy Hall. Justin says, I see that Alex is saying that I'm dismissive of her in this text message to Angie Giannetti. Yes. So Christy Hall, I guess, wanted to direct, but this was Wayfair's project. If Justin Baldoni was the director, they don't really have the right to steamroll over him. I understand that this film and the people that they, brought on to work with understood that there would be a lot of female voices that went into this, but it doesn't really give them the right to take over the movie from the Wayfair parties who were putting it together. Like if he already decided he was going to be the director and she signed on to be a writer, I understand feeling disappointed and feeling like you could do more and you want to do more, but it's not your right, really. So, like, yes, you can raise these grievances, I guess, and complain about it and feel annoyed and don't like the person who doesn't give you what you want, but it's not a crime for them to say, like, no, sorry, we already have the director. You're not going to be the director. So, like, it's not really manipulative, to say no to that. She wasn't signed on to be the director. It's not what happened. So it's just very strange. And then when you're upset with someone about something, of course you're going to view some things that they say and do as dismissive. You might be annoyed with everything they do. It's like that term bitch eating crackers. I don't know if you guys know that, but it's like when you don't like someone, so all of a sudden everything they do is like terrible. Like, look at that bitch eating those crackers. Like, oh my God, that's so annoying. It's kind of like that. So I don't know. I wasn't there if they were actually dismissive or irritating or anything like that. I'm just saying it's not a given just because somebody didn't like them that they did anything necessarily wrong or were dismissive or were irritating or whatever. Give me one sec here. Teresa says, sure, try sitting at your boss's desk today, see what happens. I mean, there's lots of settings where you don't like the boss or you don't like the way they do things, but you signed on to do that job and work for this person. So that's what you got to do. Sucks, but that is how it is. Okay. Do you believe you were dismissive to Christy Hall? He says, not at all. Okay. Here's another text from Alex Sachs. It says, in short, she didn't feel respected as a female voice on the team, and on a movie like this, that felt especially bad. Okay. So, again, like I said, I understand what it's like to feel bad and to want to do more or feel like you deserve more even, but you're not entitled to it. Not if you signed on as like a writer. If she didn't feel respected as a female voice on the team, like you got to kind of take gender out of that one because it doesn't really have anything to do with her being a female. It's just they already had a director. It's not your right to be the director. All right. Do you see that she also says, Miss Sachs says of Miss Hall, she's scared of a backlash. Who isn't? Okay. Do you understand one way or the other whether Miss Hall felt disrespected as a female voice on the team? Justin says, not until I read this just now. Gottlieb asks, and you testified earlier that Miss Sachs and Miss Jenny is who you learned the concerns or complaints, however you describe it, about the hugging, that they're the ones who told you. Justin says, yes. So you see that Miss Jenny at 2:59 p.m. says, so many things stacking up, people are so upset or pissed off about. I cannot believe how they just keep on coming. Okay. So again, being upset with the way they're running things, not liking the way your boss does things, that's unfortunate. And maybe you could even be correct. They could even be correct that they had better ideas on how to run things, but it's still not a right. You know, you still don't have the right to do that. That's not what you were hired for. You're not entitled to it. So it's not like, I'm not saying, oh my God, they're terrible people. You know what I mean? I'm just saying there's a little bit of entitlement there that doesn't really line up with the real world, and that everybody has to kind of, or well, most people, I should say, have to work for somebody who maybe doesn't do everything the way they want it done. So, all right. Is that consistent with your understanding of what was happening? Justin says, I don't remember what was happening other than I got isolated and kicked off my own film. So these text messages are in June 2024. That's after the filming took place, a couple months before the premiere, when everybody's starting to get like kind of riled up against Justin as the promotion for the film and all that's going on, I think. If my timeline is off, correct me, but it was a couple months before the premiere, so I believe that's correct. Okay. Do you see Miss Sachs says, I think this is where the narcissism is dangerous, and I don't think he remembers honestly or knows that he's doing anything wrong. Okay. Again, you don't have to like somebody. That doesn't necessarily mean they're doing anything wrong. Okay. Can I ask what you're referring to? Because he's asking, do you agree with Miss Sachs that you did not remember or knew that you were doing anything wrong? He's like, what are you referring to? I can't begin to speculate about what Miss Sachs is referring to when she says, I don't think he remembers honestly or knows that he's doing anything wrong. Okay. Here's another text from Miss Jenny. It says, with this many people and issues, I mean, they just keep coming. And then there's another one from Miss Sachs that says, him and Jamie have a way of making women and some men feel like shit. Okay. Well, again, this like isn't really in line with the real world. Sometimes the things that you have to do at work, or when you don't get your way at work, it feels like shit, but that's not really because of any deep personal flaws or because there was any sort of harassment. There's no harassment being relayed here, just that they weren't giving the women on the set, like they weren't letting Christy Hall be a director. They weren't letting Alex Sachs be the only producer because Jamie was also going to produce. Like that's not harassment. And it's not improper. I mean, it's just they didn't get what they wanted, and that sucks. I understand and sympathize that like that feels bad, but you're not entitled to have that, especially not just because you're a woman. If you have these like men who are working on the film with you and say we want to, you know, have input from female voices, it doesn't mean that you should take over everything. So. So Sachs and Lively wanted to take over as director, now Christy Hall too. So Christy Hall wanted to direct, Alex Sachs wanted to be the sole producer, I think, or the main producer. So basically they wanted things that they couldn't have. And again, this has nothing to do with sexual harassment. So when people see these names like Alex Sachs, Angie Giannetti, whatever, and they're talking about these grievances that they had with these guys that they were working with, the guys who were running the film, right, the director, and the heads of Wayfair, these are, yeah, sure, these are grievances, but it's not like women are not coming out and accusing him of sexual harassment. That's not what's happening here. And you can see that in this deposition. But then you have, some people online who are running with this narrative of like, oh, 9 women came forward against Justin Baldoni. I'm like, no. A woman saying that Justin Baldoni didn't give her as much, input into the script, Colleen Hoover, as she would have liked, or didn't consult her as much as she would have liked. That's not a sexual harassment allegation, So no. Right now in this deposition, they're just bringing up all these grievances that people had with them because it helps further their narrative that they did something wrong and made the set uncomfortable, right? But the thing is, you can be uncomfortable and unhappy without there being any, actual offenses, civil offenses being committed. That's just kind of how it goes sometimes. You don't have to like everyone that you work with or work for. All right. And then Alex Sachs says it's deep because they signed the checks. So by sign the check, she's referring to Wayfair Studios paying for people's compensation on the film, right? Justin says, I can't assume, I'm not on this text chain. And you as the director and co-studio head had the authority to hire, fire, remove, and discipline people on set if you chose to do so. Justin says yes. And then you see a reference at 3:05 p.m. by Miss Sachs saying, do you remember when I called Andy Davis a few weeks in and was like, Andy, he's inviting the department heads to go to Russian baths with him? Do you see that? And then who is Andy Davis? It says head of production at Sony. Okay. I was like, what do I do? He's like, you have to tell him he can't do that. Everyone has something weird, uncomfortable, and bad to say. Okay. You can think that's weird. I mean, I'm not going to argue against that. I think that's totally subjective. If that makes someone personally feel weird, then they have every right to feel that way and every right to raise that issue. But the thing is, if you don't raise the issue, then you can't be like shocked Pikachu face when nothing changes or when you don't get what you want from it, Okay. Let's see. Did Miss Sachs tell you that you weren't allowed to take people to Russian baths? No, she did not. Did anyone tell you? No, she didn't. Did Miss Janetti ever tell you that many people had something weird or uncomfortable or bad to say about what was happening on the film? No, she didn't. Did anyone? Not until I read about them like this. So look, personally, I would not go to a Russian bath with people that I work with. I don't really know what goes into a Russian bath so much. I'm not into doing that kind of thing with coworkers. Somebody says Russian baths are a normal thing in New York and New Jersey. We invited everyone we know. Look, it could be a totally normal thing. I wouldn't go with a coworker, but like, I don't know. You have to kind of point that out and be like, hey, I feel a little uncomfortable with you inviting me to do that. Please don't let it happen again. You know what I mean? But they didn't tell him about anything like this. And they're texting about these issues in June 2024. And these are things that happened before they even filmed the movie. So it's just really strange. All right. And then Mike Gottlieb asks, what would you have done if you had been handed this text chain on June 15th, 2024, if you had known on June 15th that in Miss Janetti's view, that everyone has something weird, uncomfortable, and bad to say about what was happening on your set, what would you have done? And then Justin says, on June 15th, the movie was already finished, and I believe anything that's referenced in this text exchange, if I'm not mistaken, either happened before the movie began as it relates to what you said about Christy Hall, or in pre-production, but I could be wrong. There's not really much you can do at that point. Okay. Do you see what Miss Sachs says as read? Russell said when he rapped, he felt like he left a cult. Do you find that offensive? Justin says it wouldn't be the first time people around this case have said I was in a cult, right? And we saw that kind of in the media with the LA Times and shit like that as well. So I think you testified earlier about meetings with Miss Lively that occurred in her apartment. Is that right? Is that the first place you met with Miss Lively? He says the first place, it was in the same building. So they met like in her same building, different apartment or different room or something. Okay. When was that meeting? He says sometime before Christmas in December, I think December 22nd. And when you first met with Miss Lively, she had not yet agreed to play the role of Lily in the film. Is that right? Yes. And you had not yet decided whether you were sure if you wanted her to play the role of Lily in the film, correct? Or right? Justin says correct. Okay. And I redlined through some pages here where it's like we don't need to read all of those words. It's going to get a little redundant, or I've read them to you before from exhibits. So that's why some of the stuff is crossed out. So here, where I can paraphrase, Lively, they're meeting at Lively's apartment building. Lively is pregnant, about to have her first boy. We've seen this before, so I didn't want to read everything word for word. They're talking about the conversation where she's having a boy. It's her unborn baby they're talking about. Among other things, you discussed whether Miss Lively's baby would be circumcised, right? Justin says that was a conversation, yes. And in the context of that conversation, did you at any point share with Miss Lively whether you were circumcised? He says yes. Did Miss Lively ask you whether you were circumcised? Directly, no. Who was present at the moment when you relayed to Miss Lively that you were circumcised? Justin says there were people going all around. Mr. Reynolds was in and out of the conversation. She had, I think, 2 nannies. I felt like there was a housekeeper there. Her assistant was walking around. I think she had 2 assistants there. Her and I were sitting on the couch, but there was people all around. And then Gottlieb says, have you ever told any other work colleague at any point about your genitalia? Justin says, I don't talk about my genitalia, so no. All right. And we have seen that before, so. What are you doing back there? All right. Okay, give me one sec, guys. All right. Okay, do you recall when the script was sent to Miss Lively? Justin says, I assume before the meeting. Do you know whether the script that Miss Lively received before the meeting and prior to when she accepted the role was the same script that was used when she started shooting? Justin says it was not. So he's working on the script, revising, drafting with Christy Hall, I think Jamie Heath, and someone else. He mentions it later on here. Do you have an understanding prior to the start of production whether the issue of nudity or sex scenes was important in any respect to Miss Lively? Justin says, I knew Miss Lively felt that the movie needed to be very sexy, but outside of that, can you repeat the question one more time? I want to make sure I answer it correctly. So again, we'll see the word sexy thrown around here a lot. Blake Lively, used it. Sony rep used it. Like Sony was saying they wanted to add more sexy to the movie. And then like people are all up in arms about when he uses the word sexy later on, but we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. Okay, he says, prior to the start of production, not, but prior to the start of principal photography, yes. Okay. And then I redlined down some pages here. And so it was important to Miss Lively in this agreement, at least as it's being expressed here on December 23rd, that she would have mutual approval rights over the screenplay. Do you see that? Justin says, I see what I believe is the first round of markups and negotiations from Miss Lively's side, because I also see it says produced by credit on screen. So to me, it looks like this was the first round of everything. It's like the wish list of everything that her team would want. So they're asking about like a draft agreement, not the final one. And we've not seen the final one, right? Because for some reason she doesn't want people to see that. And we still to this point have not seen that to my knowledge. Hold on, let's keep going. Okay. You see subsection D, approval of press releases and statements. Is that something that would also be important to you in a film that you were co-leading? Justin says, I'm not sure I've ever asked for that or thought I could have that. But again, I can't speculate. And I also, do you have the final contract by chance? No, nobody has the final contract, apparently. So hang on, let me turn this fan on real quick. Hopefully that's not too loud. Just a sec. Hello from India. Hi. What time is it there? Okay. Okay. Do you see how in subsection E it's written in no nudity / simulated sex without artist prior written consent and negotiation / execution of a nudity writer? Very standard, yes. Okay. And then we cut out some of this here. They're still talking about the script, right? So this is April 10th. Do you have any estimate or recollection at all, as you sit here today, of how many different drafts the script had gone through, from December of 2022 till this point in April of 2023. He says, I don't believe any official drafts. You were making edits, and I think you said earlier in conjunction with Sony. He says conjunction with producers and the writer, Christy Hall. Right. Okay. Okay. On page 47, I believe we were in scene 39, and there's a description at the bottom of the page of a bedroom scene. Do you see where I am? And do you see in the description of a bedroom scene, a description of a sex scene between the characters Ryle and Lily? Justin says, this is the beginning of their romance. I believe this is right as they are falling in love on screen. Okay. Mr. Gottlieb says, did you write the words that appear from the bolded bedroom to the end of the page where you have an italicized, and then here he's reading from the script. It says, these two newly formed lovers, okay, become one. Justin says, I don't believe I did. I believe those were Christy Hall's words, all 3 paragraphs. I'm sure that I adjusted some words. This, to me, my memory of it, this was written and feels like Christy Hall's writing. Okay. Do you know one way or the other, as you sit here today, whether this description of a bedroom scene between Ryle and Lily was in the script that was sent to Miss Lively in December of 2022? Justin says, my recollection is that many of the intimate scenes were worked on since that first draft that Miss Lively had. Okay. So that would be a no with respect to this scene. He says, I don't know specifically this scene if it was in the script or not. So was this in the draft that she got, basically? And he's saying, I don't know. Many of the ones we worked on many of the scenes were worked on since she got that first draft, right? So you're saying that many of the intimate scenes that were in the script that Miss Lively saw in December of 2022 were scenes that you were working on in between December of 2022 and April of 2023. Correct. Okay, were you working on those scenes with Miss Lively at that time? Justin says no. You were working on them with Miss Hall. Justin says it was Christy Hall, Alex Sachs, Andrew Kaloff, Angie Giannetti, and Jamie Heath. So lots of people working on this script. If you turn the page, one page to page 49, you see scene 42, Boston Grace Hospital hallway, neurosurgery floor. And you see a discussion of a scene at the hospital when Lily comes to see Ryle. Yeah, so I'm glad they cut this scene out of the film because what I'm about to read to you is extremely cringy, right? Okay. Hang on. Here's the scene. Lily says, hello there, doctor. Ryle says, hey, I didn't expect to see you today. And Lily, coy, sexy, says, yeah, well, I think I need a physical. Maybe you can help me out. Okay, like, ugh. I'm glad they cut that because that's cringy, like cringy as fuck. There's nothing wrong with it per se. I mean, if they wanted to leave it in there, fine. I'm just saying, I think it's fucking cringy. Like, that's just my opinion. Oh, jeez. Okay. All right. Did you write that? Justin says, I did not. This was specifically an idea that Christy Hall had when we were meeting together over 2 days in my office at Wayfarer. Mike Gottlieb says, did you think it was a good idea? Justin says, I think I did at the time. That's probably why it's in the script. Oh, Justin, we got to talk about. Oh, no. No. Sorry. Okay. Did you ever change your mind about that? Justin says, change my mind about putting in the script or that it was a good idea? That it was a good idea. Justin says, I'm not sure. I don't believe Miss Lively liked it, and so we took it out. Right. So even if she wasn't working on the script, like drafting it with them in the background or like tweaking it in the background during this time, she still had a say in like whether or not these scenes were carried out. You know, so he's saying, I don't believe that Blake liked it, so we took it out. So it's not like she didn't have any say. And I gotta say, I'm glad she did take that out because that is a cringy ass scene. Woo. All right. Okay. Is there anyone else who didn't like it? Justin says, I don't recall. I feel like it made the script because people liked that I was that I was collaborating with. Okay. The lawyer says, what did you like about this? Justin says, or about the dialogue. Okay, Justin says, "What I can't comment on the dialogue. The dialogue is like it's always a work in progress until an actress says it out loud. You don't know if it works." But to answer your question specifically, and I highlighted this because this is important. There was a request from Sony to add more sexy to the movie, and we were constantly looking for ways to do it that also fit into the budget because we had location constraints, time constraints. We could only be in certain places at certain times. As I remember, the specific instance was a little bit of the tail wagging the dog because we were having to pay a lot of money to rent out a hospital, and there weren't enough scenes to shoot in the hospital. Okay. And we did see some footage from one of those hospital scenes that didn't make the film in the exhibits to one of these summary judgment or the judgment on the pleadings. I can't remember which one. But we did see, there was some footage there. They just decided not to use it. That the lines that we just read were not in that scene. So obviously it got changed, which is fine. Okay. So when you put those two things together, because they're having an issue where they have to do more, scenes that are sexy per Sony, and they also need to utilize their time well when they're working with the hospital and the budget and all that. They said Christy had a great idea of maybe she should play doctor. Thank God that didn't happen. Okay. And as I often did, she's a woman. She's a brilliant writer, talking about Christy Hall. I'm not going to argue with her of what is sexy or not because I wanted this to be from that gaze anyway. So I thought it was perfectly fine. And this is why I think it's so weird. Like he would be very considerate and inclusive of the opinions of the women who are working with him, right? But then when they wouldn't, let them steamroll him and be like, I want to be the director, and Justin is already the director, then they get upset. I will only also add that we were also constantly going back to the book to figure out how to adapt it in a way that made Ryle and Lily's relationship more sexual and Atlas's and Lily's relationship more romantic because we wanted them to be two different situations. If you haven't read the book, Atlas and Lily meet when they're in high school. They have their little romance. Then in the future, when the events in the movie start, Lily and Ryle meet. Ryle is Justin's character. They get married, have their relationship or whatever. But then Atlas comes back into the picture. So they wanted to make a big difference between those two relationships to where Ryle and Lily have more of a sexual relationship and Atlas and Lily have more of a romantic relationship. Got it. So there was a lot more talk about making sure there was more Ryle and Lily because in the book, there is, by the time they get together, there's a lot more sexual interaction between the two. And we just didn't have nearly enough in the movie. Is there a scene in the book that involves Ryle and Lily playing doctor in the hospital and then having sex in an exam room? Justin says no. Well, isn't this something you should sue Christy Hall over if you're upset about that? Since it was her idea, what are you doing? And I think your testimony was it was a good idea to add this because it made good use of the amount that the studio was paying the hospital for production. Justin says, I don't believe that was my testimony. Mr. Gottlieb says, would adding a sex scene not in the book be considered gratuitous? Justin says no, because none of the sex scenes that were in the movie as they currently exist were ever in the book in the way they are. So they didn't film things exactly true to the book in that regard, like most films don't. They're not exactly the book. But you can tell from everything that he just explained that this wasn't adding sex scenes to be gratuitous. It was Sony was saying they wanted more sexy in the movie, and they had to figure out a way to work that in with the budget, the time constraints, and the locations that they had. So they had to kind of tweak things and work with that. It's not really a matter of being gratuitous. You're just using your resources to the best of your ability, and you're writing the script with that in mind. So it's not like a creepy thing. All right. And again, the female writer came up with that shit. So what are you complaining about? Okay. I report Mint Mobile ads is unpleasant because they, oh God. Guys, we can't choose the ads that pop up during our YouTube videos. So whatever ads you get, I did not pick them. So give me 1 sec. Who doesn't have sex in the hospital? Me. I worked in one, and I would not ever want to have sex in there. Oof. Yikes. Okay. This isn't Grey's Anatomy. I don't know. Maybe other hospitals are a different story, but not mine. Anyways. So we're looking again at the script. He's referencing something that says Aria Hotel Penthouse Suite Night. And that is the wedding night for Ryle and Lily. It says, towards the end of that, it's written, as the two climax at the same time, they lock eyes and cannot help but smile, baffled that they found each other. And we have, sorry guys, thought I was going to burp. We have seen this before. It's this issue with the script says the two climax at the same time. That was apparently Christy Hall's idea to add that in there. Okay. So they were writing that scene together. And like adults who are doing a romantic movie with sex in it are going to like sit there and work on the script together. And it's like, it's mechanical, it's work. It's not like gross porn stuff. You know what I mean? Like, again, this is not weird. Justin says, we were writing a movie that was filled with romance and lust and intimacy and sex. And again, these are all outlines. So a script has far less description than a book. So you have It Ends With Us, which has a ton of pages and very detailed descriptions of various scenes so that you can paint the picture in your mind. And all writers do, which I learned a lot in this process, is you have to give some sort of outline so that as you're reading the script, you have an idea of what's happening. And then you work out all the details once you start production, both with the actress in accordance with what the standard is, what is standard for approval, and then after the actress with the intimacy coordinator to figure out what each of these things actually really mean. Okay. Did you ever have a conversation with anyone else, cast, crew, production on It Ends With Us about Lily and Ryle climaxing together other than Christy Hall? Justin says, I think I spoke with about every single intimate scene with our intimacy coordinator, as one should, right? Sorry, I got distracted. Okay. So Miss Hall and your intimacy coordinator, and then he says eventually Miss Lively, right? Do you recall having a conversation with Miss Lively about this specific line here? Okay. Do you have any recollection of having a conversation with Miss Lively about the scene in which you discuss you and your wife? And we've seen this portion of the deposition before, so again, I'm not going to read it word for word. But he's talking about this scene where the idea for the scene, which they didn't end up doing, to the best of my recollection, was that Ryle and Lily were making love. Lily had climaxed or had an orgasm, and Ryle did not. Right. And then Justin says, when I shared what the idea for the scene, Miss Lively then made it personal and said, oh God, that would mortify me if that happened to me. To which I then responded, as one does, because when you're two grown adults with children who are married, in the context of talking about sex scenes with a movie that you're making with a person who is understanding that there are going to be sex scenes in a book based with a lot of sex in it, the only thing you really have to share are personal experiences. So I said, oh, well, some of the most beautiful moments have been when that's happened with me and my wife. And that was it. So you're allowed to feel uncomfortable with that. I guess you're allowed to feel uncomfortable with that. Yeah. But you have to like just say that, right? Just be like, oh, that's kind of weird. I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to hear that. I don't like that. Right. But then don't, like text weird, flirty stuff with like innuendo and then talk about your personal life in ways that you wouldn't want them talking to you about their personal life. You know what I mean? Like, that's just weird. But he says that was it. I was interested in shooting all the sex scenes from the female gaze. Did Miss Lively have a female gaze? Justin says, I would imagine so if she's female. Okay. Did you believe that gaze was important in incorporating ideas about how these various scenes should be shot? Justin says, absolutely. That's why I incorporated all of her ideas without hesitation. Okay. And it's your testimony that when you say Miss Lively said she would be mortified, that you believe she was referring to, Justin says, if that happened to her. Those were her words. If that happened in her personal life, yes, it was a personal comment. Like if it was inferring that if she was inferring that if her husband didn't finish, if she didn't finish her husband or climax her husband, that she would be mortified. That's what she said. So she said, oh, that would mortify me if it happened to me. Okay. Then they move on talking about a meeting in April 2023. Okay. Your recollection is that you specifically recall Miss Lively saying about herself personally, oh no, they're still talking about the same fucking thing. Oh my God, move on, man. She'd be mortified if the events described in the scene happened to her in her personal life. Justin says, yes, that's why I then shared what I shared. And that was a very normal thing for Miss Lively. You were two adults, two professionals having a conversation, and one of the only things you have is your personal experience. So I didn't think anything of it. And that's like the weird double standard here, to where they would share all this stuff with him and get very personal. And then if he were to kind of return the sentiment, then they're like, oh my God, you're creepy. But then they don't say that. They don't tell him that. They don't say, like, I didn't like that, please don't do that anymore. It's like, they just don't tell him. And then later, months, even over a year later, are just like, well, you know, he's creepy. We should burn him at the stake. So that's just kind of weird. All right. Did you ever tell Miss Lively that Christy Hall was working with you on drafts? My recollection is that Miss Lively was on spring break and I don't think we were in that much communication, but I don't know. Yeah. So you don't know if you ever told Miss Lively that one way or the other. Justin says, I imagine I did because I often told her I'm not a writer and I was kind of in this position where I was having to write. Okay. I don't have a specific recollection of a conversation where I said to Miss Lively that Christy was helping me. Okay. Mike says, but you did tell her that you had worked on ideas for the scenes with an intimacy coordinator. Justin says that was the entire context of the meeting we had at her place. And who was the intimacy coordinator? Lizzie Talbot. Did you read Miss Talbot's deposition transcript in this case? Justin says no. Well, nobody else has seen it either well, you know why. Have you ever talked to Miss Talbot about her recollection of any of the events relating to the script or production in this case? Justin says no. Okay, so they move on. They took a little break here, and they're going to talk about something else. Give me 1 second here, guys. Did there come a time in May of 2023 where you learned that Jenny Slate and Miss Lively had made concerns known regarding comments that you had made on the set? In May of 2023, I believe, yes. Who told you about Miss Slate and Miss Lively's concerns? And he says Angie Giannetti and Alex Sachs did, right? What do you recall Miss Sachs telling you about Miss Slate's concerns? I recall her having lunch with Miss Slate and saying that Miss Slate, she listed a few things. She said Miss Slate had not appreciated the recording that I made during pre-production with her and Miss Lively. She had not appreciated a comment I had made on set regarding her wardrobe, something she was wearing. I believe she also said that Miss Slate didn't like that I was interacting with the fans outside. There was a lot of fans when we were shooting, and on certain breaks, I would go and say hi to them because they were out there all day. And if I recall correctly, she was saying to Miss Sachs that she didn't want to be asked to go out and do that as well because she was a private person. But like who asked you? Nobody. So she was asking not to be asked to interact with the fans. I don't know if it was Alex or Angie who told me that she felt the set was too huggy or comfortable or whatever. The set was too comfortable. Okay. I know huggy was a word that was used because I remember the word. That's the best of my recollection at the moment. So in pre-production, we know from other exhibits that we've seen, he recorded a meeting, and I think it was a Zoom meeting, he said, where they were doing some kind of improv. And this was during pre-production. And they say that they had no idea he was recording, but actually when you use Zoom and somebody's recording the call, you have to actually like click out of a prompt that alerts you that the call is being recorded. So that right there is like a red flag. That doesn't make sense. As far as the rest of it, let's see. We know about the comment with the wardrobe. That's the one thing I'll say, you know, if she had a problem with what he said, then she had every right to say, hey, I don't appreciate that. Please don't do that again. Right. But that's the end of it. It's not like a thing that somebody should be burned at the stake for. You know what I mean? Especially when they're throwing around the word sexy the way that they have, as we've seen a billion times in all this. Right. Okay. With the thing with the fans outside, nobody made you do that. Nobody made you do that, right? So what's the issue there? And this is why I was talking about in the very beginning of the stream, the bitch eating crackers thing, right? It's like she decided she hated him, like he irritated her, she didn't like it. And so then everything that he did clearly annoyed her, but her like annoyance with him is not something that someone else should then be paid hundreds of millions of dollars in damages for. So she didn't like that he was being nice and interacting with the fans. Okay. And then as far as the being too huggy or being too comfortable or whatever, again, this is something like 99% of this stuff, these like grievances or annoyances they had with the Wayfarer parties is like human communication. Could have nipped that in the bud so fucking quick. But instead they let their feelings like fester, and they were getting increasingly annoyed over trivial stuff, and then acting like the Wayfarer parties were like the worst people in the world. So, I don't know too much about Jenny. I do know that she, at one point on a show or a podcast or something, made comments about how she had physically hit her boyfriend. And I think that what people like to ignore when they're talking about this stuff is that she made those comments and that this was a movie about domestic violence. And so people try to write it off as, well, Justin Baldoni's, fans or whatever just want to, burn all these women at the stake. I'm like, no, that's like a legitimate critique to have of somebody who's portraying a character in a movie about domestic violence. If they've made comments about domestic abuse in their relationship, I didn't watch it personally. I've now seen what was said, and so I can't tell you if it was in jest maybe, but it's like, people can feel how they feel about that, personally, I haven't really made a judgment on whether or not she should be like canceled over it. You know what I mean? But I'm saying like people are allowed to feel that way. And it has nothing to do with sexism, right? And it has nothing to do with, her not wanting her outfit to be called sexy. That's like a legitimate issue if you feel uncomfortable with that you can raise, right? But that doesn't mean that everything else she ever does is infallible or that everything else she ever says is reasonable. So, and I will say this, because I think it's hard not to see somebody who regularly makes sexual comments in conversation or like in their content. It's hard not to automatically go to like, well, then she needs to shut up and stop complaining about that. I think that doesn't necessarily give anyone a blanket permission to make sexual comments to that person in a workplace setting. But what happened was very clearly not like a situation where she was being hit on or actually sexualized in any way. So they were actually talking about like the outfits and how the outfits were supposed to be sexy. So, all right. Give me 1 second here. Okay. So between Miss Sachs and Miss Janetti, you were told Miss Slate thought the set was too huggy, yes? Okay. Did Miss Janetti's description of Miss Slate's concerns differ in any material respect to you? And then he talks about what Miss Janetti said to him. So Angie Janetti, who worked with Sony, here's what happened, or what he was told by Angie. She told me she had asked Miss Slate if she wanted to file a report, if she wanted her to do something with it. That was not something that Alex said anything about it. So this is just from Angie, who's telling him this for the first time. To which Miss Slate said no. Miss Janetti had also said on that call that when Miss Slate had said that I had commented on her wardrobe and used the word sexy, that Miss Janetti asked if she felt it was sexual or if I was hitting on her, and she said no, it wasn't sexual. She just didn't appreciate it. So she found it annoying or uncomfortable, but she openly admitted to Miss Janetti, who was trying to see if she should file a report, who's like helping her, right? Like, do we need to do something about this? And she's like, no, it wasn't sexual. So then to then turn around and try to characterize it that way, when it benefits you in some material way later on, people are allowed to feel suspicious about that, right? Okay. That's how, in my recollection, and I believe it was from Miss Janetti that I had heard that Miss Slate didn't appreciate the way that Jamie or Mr. Heath had offered to pay for her additional housing as he was talking about the sanctity of motherhood. So we know that she had a problem with that, right? With Jamie Heath saying he would like they would give money to her to help her get different housing because she felt unsafe as a new mother in the current housing situation she had. She felt unsafe there. And so he says something about the sanctity of motherhood and how they're going to help her get a better situation for her and her kid. And she complained about that. So again, that's what I'm saying. Like, a lot of this is just annoyance because you don't like somebody. And so you're interpreting everything that they do through an intensely negative lens. And it's like pretty clear to people who are being objective that that's not a thing that you should burn someone at the stake for. If you're like, please help me, I don't feel safe with my child in my current apartment. And they're like, well, we want you to feel safe. We value like families and mothers and something about the sanctity of motherhood. And then, so we're going to help you get a different place. Like, that's not like, what? It's bizarre to complain about that. All right. And so before, when you were testifying about what Ms. Sachs told you, you had mentioned a comment about a wardrobe. That comment about a wardrobe included the use of the word sexy. Correct. And your testimony is that the comment was about the wardrobe choice. Justin says, I don't think that's what I said. Okay. Mike says, we'll get back to your description of that in just a moment. Am I correct that in response to receiving this information from Ms. Sachs and Ms. Janetti, you sent a message to Ms. Slate? Justin says, well, this was the first I had heard about it. Ms. Slate had not come to me directly, and I felt terrible, and I wanted to apologize. But I also didn't want to burden her with that or make her uncomfortable, so I thought it would be best, based on the kind of power dynamic and the awkwardness of it, to actually send it to Alex so that I didn't have to force her, Jenny, to accept my apology or something. So I was just trying to be respectful. And so, yes, I sent Alex a message to send to Ms. Slate, which I feel like is a reasonable thing to do if Jenny is not telling him directly that she didn't like something. She's going to Alex and Angie and saying, hey, I don't like this, and they in turn have to talk to him. It's kind of reasonable to then go through them to try to relay the message of, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. You know what I mean? I don't think that's weird. You didn't want to make Miss Slate uncomfortable by sending her a message directly. Justin says yes. And that's because you understood that Miss Slate was already uncomfortable in certain respects. Justin says, well, I understood that since she had shared that she had not appreciated some of my behavior, as soon as I was aware of it, I didn't want to add to that in any way. So I wanted to send it to her so I didn't create any more discomfort. Okay. So he's learning that she was uncomfortable for the first time, and then he wants to correct the behavior and apologize. Like, what else are you supposed to do at that point? That is the correct course of action. Person A feels a certain way about something, uncomfortable, didn't like something. They communicate that to person B. Person B says, I'm so sorry, it won't happen again. And then the behavior changes and everybody moves on. You go do your job every day like you're supposed to. Like, it's really not fucking rocket science. Or hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damages in sexual harassment, especially when we're talking about someone who is not the plaintiff or a party to this case at all. It's ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. Okay. And you were also informed about Miss Lively's discomfort as well, correct? Yes, from Angie Giannetti, he says. Okay, let's continue on Miss Slate for a moment. Mr. Baldoni, you've been handed what's been marked as Exhibit 26. This is a document bearing the bait stamp, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this is a text between you and Alex Sachs. Is that correct? Okay. And you see at the bottom of the page, you ask Miss Sachs if you can send your notes to Jenny and Blake. I do. And then do you see on another page, you send 2 draft notes to Miss Slate and Miss Lively. You send them to Miss Sachs. Yes. So he's drafting basically apologies, notes that he could send to Jenny and Blake, and he's showing them to Alex Sachs. Alex Sachs, who we went through Alex Sachs's deposition, and by all accounts, she was absolutely playing both sides. To other people, she was saying the Wayfair parties were terrible and disgusting. And then to the Wayfair parties, as we saw in her deposition notes, she was saying that Blake Lively was being ridiculous and, oh my God, we have to stop her. She's trying to take over everything. So she was very much playing both sides, and that kind of shoots your credibility in the foot, right? So I don't imagine that she's actually going to be too useful to anyone in that regard. And I understand, that's a difficult position to be in, honestly. I can't speak to her motives, but I do think that is a difficult position to be in. But the way that she handled it brings into question whether or not you can believe what she's saying, So, all right. Right. In the note to Miss Slate that you're asking Miss Sachs to send, you say, I recognize the last few days of filming have been difficult, but I wanted you to know that the work is really great and I'm excited for what we're creating. And then Gottlieb says, were you being straightforward and truthful when you said that the last few days of filming had been difficult? Justin said, yes. I said, first off, thank you for putting your all into the film. And then I said, I recognize that the last few days of filming have been difficult. So they were difficult. So I was being truthful, of course. So like, he's trying to apologize. The first time he's ever been notified that these women were, having negative feeling towards him for something or didn't like something that he did. And he's drafting it to someone he thinks is his friend to help him, like send them the message saying, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for all your hard work. And, I'll do better, basically. And they're just badgering him about this for some reason. So he says, imagine using these bits of evidence to try to convince a jury and judge that you're owed $700,000 compensation for sexual harassment. Yeah. Right. Not only that, but also remember the 47.1 law that she's trying to use, which we don't know if that's going to come into play or not, but the California 47.1 law, which would award, treble damages in some regard. I couldn't tell you exactly how that will play out, but she's trying to get some crazy, crazy money because Justin Baldoni called someone else's pants sexy. Like, what the fuck? All right. So, Russian baths / spa visits are totally normal from production to talent and anyone ATO. Huh. Yeah, I just don't really know much about that. All I know is what we're reading in the deposition, which is that he invited people to one. I mean, not people, but some people from Sony or something, or whatever it said in the beginning. Okay. All right. Every day on a movie set is honestly challenging, but those few days, there were a lot of big challenges production-wise. Right. Okay, so there's not really a problem with that. Gottlieb reads some more of the message. It says, equally important is that I was made aware of your concerns. I wanted you to know they are fully received. I hear you and adjustments will be made accordingly. Wow. What a dick. Come on, man. Like, seriously. That should have been the end of it. That should have been the end of the grievance. Okay. And your reference there to your concerns, are those the concerns you had just listed out to me that you'd been relayed from Ms. Sachs and Ms. Janetti? He says, correct, the ones involving myself. Okay. And are there any other concerns that as you sit here today, you can think of that you could have been referring to other than the ones you just testified about? Justin says, specifically, I was answering your question as it related to Jenny Slate. So if you're talking about concerns in general, okay. And Gottlieb says, all I'm trying to understand is if other than what you just testified to, there's anything else you can think about that you were referring to when you wrote your concerns. Okay. Justin says, I would go back to a previous question. I would include a concern I don't think mentioned to me from Alex, but if you're asking if I was inferring anything, there was an instance that happened with Miss Lively on set as well, where I also used the word sexy in relation to wardrobe that Miss Slate was there for. So I would lump that into the overall concerns. Right. And you knew that Miss Slate was concerned about that comment as well to Miss Lively. Justin says, Miss Slate and I had a conversation with Miss Lively about that comment. Okay, and Miss Slate told you she did not appreciate or feel comfortable with that comment. Justin says, I don't believe those were the words she used. Gottlieb says, what were the words? Justin says, I believe I don't have the exact words, but it had to do with, in general, we are the collective, we're staying away from using those words to describe, women's bodies. And it's not what he was trying to do, but that's how she received it. And if that's how she received it, then she has every right to bring that up, bring it forward and say, don't do that again. You know what I mean? But he responded to it in the appropriate manner. Justin says it was like in kind of Miss Slate is a very funny woman, kind of a disarming, joking kind of way, but it wasn't your words. So he's saying that Jenny Slate brought him aside and they had a conversation where she was joking around with him, trying to be lighthearted and funny and be like, hey, we're not using those words. We don't use those words about women's bodies. You know what I mean? And I understand he still listened to it and he still said, I'm so sorry. I'm not going to do it again. You know what I mean? Even if it was conveyed to him in a joking tone, he still received the message. Okay. And then Gottlieb says, do you think that was Miss Slate's female gaze? Shut up, man. Hang on. Objection to describing her wardrobe as sexy would constitute her female gaze on that particular situation. Justin says yes. Okay. Did you have a different gaze from your male perspective? Justin says, I don't know if it's possible that I can have a different gaze as a male, so I'm sorry. I don't know what you're asking. Justin says, or sorry, no, Gottlieb says, so Miss Slate, not you, would know from, hold on. Does this cut off there? Oh, no, I got to go up this way. Right. Would know from the female gaze the impact of having somebody say that you look sexy in a piece of clothing. Justin says, that's not what I said to Miss Lively, but absolutely, Miss Slate would have a female gaze and I would not. Would Miss Lively have one? As I said earlier, so long as Miss Lively identifies as female, she would have a female gaze. All right. Do you see, were any of the concerns that were reported to you by Miss Slate provided to anyone in HR at Wayfair Studios? Justin says, to my knowledge, no. Okay. You did not report any of the concerns that Miss Slate had raised with you to anyone in HR at Wayfair Studios? Justin says, I did not. Do you see that you've also written a note to Miss Lively here? And you essentially use similar language with respect to Miss Lively's concerns, is that right? You say, I want you to know I've been made aware of your concerns and I hear you. They are fully received and adjustments will be made imminently. Yes. And you say, the dailies are looking wonderful and while the last 2 days were tough, I assure you that your work was fantastic. And you say, I truly believe you're creating one of your most honest performances that will have a long-lasting and powerful impact. Do you see that also? He says, I do. Were you being dishonest when you wrote this to Miss Lively? He says, no. You did not believe as of May 30th that Miss Lively's concerns had been fabricated. Well, okay, so he's asking about this sentence where Justin is saying Blake was, giving a good performance in her role on the film. And then the lawyer here tries to twist that and say, so you're saying she was honest about her concerns. You did not believe that she was fabricating her concerns. Those are two very different things. Justin says the concerns, well, I don't think we've talked about her concerns yet. Okay. Gottlieb says the concerns to which you're responding here when you say, I've been made aware of your concerns and I hear you. With respect to those concerns, you're saying you've been made aware of and they're fully received and adjustments will be made. Those concerns were not fabricated, right? Justin says no. You believe Miss Lively communicated those concerns to you. Let me strike that. Okay, hang on. You believe Miss Lively communicated those in good faith. Justin says, I believe the primary concern, also being COVID, the reason that I was told she called Angie is a very valid concern. I was made aware that she also didn't appreciate the use of the word sexy, but also that I apologized in the moment, and in her own words, we were good. So Blake says, we're fine. We had actually discussed this in person afterwards. So they've had a discussion about this. It never happened again, yet here we are. The majority of the concerns that I took seriously had to do with the way the set was being run. She was very adamant when she spoke to Sony about the firing of the first AD. She wanted a change. Right. So it was my understanding that the majority of the phone call with Miss Janetti had to do with COVID and the firing of the first AD. And those were the concerns that I can recall being aware of, which I do not believe were fabricated, and she had every right to feel the way she felt, including her concern with respect of your use of the word sexy. Justin says she has every right to feel that way about that word, but that was something that we worked through immediately on the spot. Okay. And I appreciate that, but to underscore the point, it's your testimony as you sit here today that Miss Lively's concern with respect to your use of the word sexy, that wasn't something she made up to take control of the film, right? Justin says, I do not believe she made up the instance where I used the word sexy to describe specifically her wardrobe. No, I don't. So he's saying, no, I did use the word sexy to describe the wardrobe. And Miss Slate's concerns were not made up so that Miss Lively could take control of the film, right? Justin says, no, I also can't speak to what Miss Lively's intentions were at the time, right? I want to show you, did you ever talk to Miss Slate after sending this message? Did you ever talk to her about the situation or her concerns directly? Justin says, I didn't feel it was appropriate to put her in that situation. So from that point on, I gave her high fives and complimented her on her work and didn't hug her and never used the word sexy again. As one does, right? Like, that's exactly what should have happened. He took the criticism, even though, it was characterized in a way that he may not have agreed with. He still understood that's how it made them feel. He's like, okay, that was uncomfortable. I'm so sorry that I made you feel that way, that I did that. I appreciate your great work, and we're going to move on. Like, that's literally like all that should have happened. We should not be here right now. Give me 1 second. Okay. I want to show you Exhibit 27. It's a text between Jenny Slate and Josh Pearl. I don't know who Josh Pearl is, but here's what the text says, I guess. Well, who is Josh Pearl, first of all? Justin says, I don't know. Well, I don't know either. The text that we're looking at, the text that we were looking at in the prior exhibit, so the messages, the apology messages that he was going to send to Jenny and Blake was from May 30th. So these are texts that Jenny sent to Josh Pearl 3 days prior. So before the communication and the apology happened, she sent this text. And were you aware by May 27th that Miss Slate felt, she says, I am not scared or anything, just repulsed and deeply irritated. Deeply irritated. Okay. Repulsed and deeply irritated. That's kind of a you problem for the most part. I mean, as far as repulsed, when it comes to the comment, we've discussed this to death at this point. When it comes to the comment about the pants or whatever, he acknowledged that she didn't like that. It made her feel uncomfortable. Apologized. Never happened again. Right? So before that apology ever happened, or she communicated that to anybody, or it was communicated to him, her feeling repulsed and irritated is like, okay. Again, with the bitch eating crackers thing, she's going to view every single thing they do through the lens of, oh my God, that bitch and her crackers. You know what I mean? That's what everything they do is so annoying or irritating or disgusting. So, right. Okay. We'll do a little bit more here and then I'll have to save the rest for tonight. But we can do some more right now. Hang on. Were you aware that's how she felt as of May 27th? No. Actually, I would like to correct that for the record. I don't know the date that Alex said anything to me. Okay, so if it was the 26th, I don't know. Okay, so we're going down here. Hang on. Let me make sure I don't skip anything too. You might have known she was deeply irritated by then. Justin says, no, I don't know what day Alex and her had lunch, so I'm unsure. I'm just talking about the date, that's all. You characterized before how the sexy comment was described to you. Is that right? Your understanding of Miss Slate's understanding of the sexy comment as told to you by Alex and Angie. Okay. Do you see at 10:24 Miss Slate characterizing that comment in her own words? She says, at that point, he made the comment to me about looking sexy, but I had decided to just try to push past it, even though it made me feel so unsettled and deeply, deeply disappointed and irritated. Okay. So again, like that was communicated. An apology was given. An immediate correction was made. Did you know that's how Miss Slate felt? Justin says, I didn't. How does it make you feel now knowing that's what Miss Slate felt in the moment? Justin says, sad. Yeah, I bet. I mean, this entire thing, and we haven't even looked at the day before where Stephanie Jones' lawyer was grilling him. And like this entire thing is like he's having to read all these text messages about all these people talking shit about him. Stuff that he's already like moved past at this point. It's been years since some of this stuff, and he's having to like sit through it again. You know what I mean? But yeah, anyways. So she said those things before he ever heard about it and apologized. Right. Okay. Here, Gottlieb is badgering him about, you wanted to tell the story through a female gaze, so why did you choose a male director? Justin says, for some time, I was actually looking for a female director. I went back and forth. Originally, I had optioned the book to direct it, and that was the original plan. Okay. Culturally, the conversation changed very fast, and so I thought maybe I shouldn't direct it. There was a period of time where I wasn't going to direct it, and then in developing it with Christy Hull and in speaking to so many of the women in my life, and women who do specific work as it relates to gender, I sought advice. I started feeling like I was seeing the movie and what was possible. And I thought if I could surround myself with the right team, that there was actually something that I could do justice to because it wasn't solely a female story. There also were elements that I believe could really be helpful to men. So ultimately, because I had the rights to the film, and it was ultimately my decision, and in consultation with friends and my wife and team, ultimately I believed in myself enough to take on the role. Okay. Mike says, you thought you would be the best person to direct this film. Justin says, at the time I did. Did Colleen Hoover ever tell you that she wanted the director of It Ends With Us to be a female? Justin says, my recollection from the very beginning was that Colleen Hoover knew I was going to be directing this film. That's why she gave me the rights. Okay. So my question is, at any point in time, did Colleen Hoover ever tell you she wanted the director of the film to be female? Justin says, I don't remember a conversation like that. It may have happened, but I feel like I would remember. Do you recall ever having a conversation with anyone where they told you maybe the director of this movie should be female? Justin says, I think during the time that I was just discussing, where there was big shifts culturally, yes, which is why we were looking for a female director for quite some time. Okay, but ultimately you decided you were better positioned to tell the story. Justin says, I wouldn't characterize it like that at all. And then he moves on to another topic here. He says, do you recall ever saying to Brandon Sklenar on the film set something to the effect of, I have to tell you something, but I don't want to get canceled or lose my job. You can't say anything on this set anymore. Justin says, I heard that in someone else's testimony, and that is not something I said. That's also not the way I speak. Whose testimony did you hear that in? I believe Jenny Slate's. Okay. Unless Jenny Slate was present for that conversation, I don't know where she got that information from. Also, apparently the conversation never happened, so these people are my bitch-eating crackers. You know what I mean? Did you come to ever feel like you couldn't be open or candid or unfiltered on your set? Justin said yes, but not for any reason that it's inferred in that text, nor would I ever say anything to Brandon Sklenar like that. My under oath testimony is that I don't believe I ever said anything to that effect to Brandon Sklenar. Okay. Did you say to Miss Slate when you made the sexy comment that you could say that because your wife was there? Justin says, my recollection of the sexy comment was that it was all kind of said in one sentence. So Miss Slate walked in as a director. I was doing whatever I was doing, getting the set ready. I looked over. She was wearing black leather pants, which were designed to, I'm sure, look sexy. And without thinking, I said something to the effect of, oh, wow, those pants look sexy on you. In my memory, if it serves me correctly, my wife was in the room nearby. And I think in my head, I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. And I say as a married man with my wife in the other room, because I did not want it to come off in any way like it apparently did. So he like kind of panicked there and they just said something awkward like, oh, it's fine. My wife's right over there. You know what I mean? So like he's trying to convey that he didn't actually mean that in like a way that he was trying to prey on her. But he's like, oh shit, maybe I shouldn't have said that. And then so he just says something awkward. It's like, I don't know. Some of us have that problem where we just like say things without really thinking them through, especially if you're really comfortable around people and you have a close relationship to them, or if you work with them all day on like really emotional stuff. Like some of us just kind of say stuff without thinking about it sometimes. And it's not all that uncommon to have like an oops moment where you're just like, oh shit, I probably should have said that. Or maybe I shouldn't have said that. Or maybe that came across weird. You know what I mean? And that's just kind of what happened there. So I was just in that moment. It was just an instance where I said something that I was like, I probably shouldn't have said that. And I tried not to make it super awkward and made a bad joke at the end of it. Yep, exactly. Mike asks, what you just described to me, I probably shouldn't have said that. My wife's in the other room. Is that something you said out loud, or is that in your head what you were thinking? Justin said it was like internal dialogue. It just came out. It was an instance where I said something without thinking. Gottlieb says, have you ever discussed in the context of the events of this film and what happened on set, have you ever discussed trying to describe them as a component of neurodivergence? Justin says that being an instance, yes. So this is where I want to leave off for now, guys, because I got to get back to work. Like I said, I will be back tonight. I don't know what time yet, but when I have a time, here's where I'll put it. If you go here, hang on. Okay, so if you go here and you look at the post tab, I usually put something here that says, you know, what time I'm doing stuff. All right, and I'll put a link. And so I'll probably do that. And then also, if you don't know yet, you can get notifications on when I'm going live and stuff when I make posts on Patreon for free. You don't have to like pay anything or anything like that. The link is in the description of this video, or mods can post the link too. That's fine. All right. So that's what I got for now. Let me see if I can redirect anyone. Where would I send you, though? Oh, dude, I think I need to make it 10 hours. It's crazy. Sorry, just trying to fix something there. My friend Nick is looking at that school shooting case, the Uvalde school shooting case. So I'll send you over there. Please tell him I said hello. That Lauren sent you. Leave robot emojis, bacon emojis if you want. All that shit. So, all right. With that, I have to go back to work now. So I'll be seeing you guys soon. appreciate you. Like I said, I'll make a playlist of these videos so they're easier to find if you missed part 1 or whatever. But I got to get back. So Butter says bye. Kind of. He's actually over there sleeping. So you can see his butt, like right there. Right there. Okay. All right. Bye.